So if you've been watching my channel for a while, you've probably noticed that I like to talk about cults. Everything from the history behind them to the people that started them. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to May's Mortem. My name is Mayfield, and today we'll be talking about how we define cults, and ways you may be able to spot one out in the wild. Now before we get started, I do need to make a disclaimer that this video is for educational purposes. I'm only relaying information that I have found online from reliable sources. I do encourage you to do your own research. Also, if you think you've found yourself in a cult and are seeking assistance, I've put some helpful links in the description for you. I also need to preface this video by saying that I'm not a cult deprogrammer, I'm not a therapist or a doctor. These are just things that I have noticed about cults in general as I've been researching them as a hobby for years. Also, here's the featured comment for this week. Thank you so much for commenting on my videos more lately, guys. I really do appreciate it. And now that we have all of that out of the way, I've got your cup of tea and I've got mine. Honestly, I might not even drink this. It is very hot outside today. So I think I've said this before on my channel, but the exact definition of what a cult is has changed multiple times throughout history. And even now, academia can't really agree on the exact definition of the word cult. Merriam-Webster defines it as a religion regarded as unorthodox or spurious, and Oxford Languages defines it as a system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object, or a relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. So generally, the word cult does seem to have negative connotations. But I've also found that it can really be used to describe any new religion, good or bad. People who study cults will often make the distinction between benign and destructive cults. A benign cult is a cult that is exactly like it sounds, a cult that doesn't hurt anyone or anything, and the relationship between the cult itself and its followers is harmless and sometimes even positive. A good example of this would be a brand cult, like people who only buy Apple products, or fans of the Nike brand who mostly only buy Nike. There can be benign cults with more of a spiritual flair to them as well, but more often than not, they don't tend to stay in the benign category if they do have that spiritual flair. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Defining a destructive cult can be just a little bit more complicated though. This term typically represents the cults that we generally think about when we are asked about cults, like the People's Temple or Heaven's Gate or the Branch Davidians, groups like that. A destructive cult is a cult that brings harm to its members. But scholars debate whether this harm has to be both psychological and physical, or if it just has to be physical harm to qualify as destructive. I personally feel that if a group causes any emotional or physical damage to its members, it's probably destructive. But the reason that people argue in academia about the way we use the term destructive cult so freely is because people have been openly applying it to just about everything. Some people will say groups like the Unification Church are a destructive cult because of how they psychologically manipulate their members. But on the other side of that argument, people do feel like that word is just being used by anti-cult crusaders to discredit their legitimacy as a religious organization. A destructive cult will demand things from their members like money, unpaid labor, or unwavering devotion at the risk of losing everything they know. They may demand these things from their members openly, but more often than not, they will use a form of psychological manipulation to make the members feel like they're giving it up of their own free will, like they weren't really coerced at all. A destructive cult will also make it very difficult for their members to leave, either because they have all of their possessions or their money, or because their friends and family are also members of the cult. So leaving the cult would mean leaving everything they knew behind. Another more obscure type of cult is a personality cult. Usually this is a cult that is devoted to just one person, such as a celebrity or a political leader. A good example of a modern personality cult is the cult that surrounds Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Because yes, that group actually does meet enough of the criteria to be defined as a cult of personality. In essence, all the religions we know of today once started as a cult, and that's just a fact. There are no religions on this planet that have just materialized into our plane of existence with thousands of followers and a fully fleshed out doctrine. So this begs the question, have we had any modern day cults that have erred into the territory of becoming a legitimate religion? This is something that is hotly debated, but I personally believe yes, we have. You could argue that Mormonism, the Unification Church, and Quakers are all more recent examples of cults that really took off. And this makes us wonder yet another question. What exactly makes these groups recognized as serious religions instead of cults? Is it the size of the cult, perhaps the amount of money that they have? Or is it just the fact that these groups have been around for a long time? Is that what makes them legitimate? Ultimately, there is no official distinction between what makes a cult and a fully fledged religion, but many people do seem to agree on the idea that a religion is a group that belongs to a wider culture where its followers come and go freely, while a cult is more countercultural and restricts the social life of its members to other cult members. So now that we know a little bit more about how cults are defined, or maybe not defined to be honest, because all of this is obviously like super open to personal interpretation, now we may be able to see how we can best identify a cult in the wild. So the number one thing that I have noticed with all groups that end up being cults is that whenever you become a member of these groups, they'll have this whole rhetoric where they'll be like, oh, like everyone thinks we're a cult, like, woo, yeah, so culty. Like people on the outside of this group have likely observed that they are in fact a cult, and the people who are on the inside of the cult take these statements as jokes and they wear them like armor. They will use these accusations as a kind of way to alienate themselves further from the outside world, and they use it as a way to bring the group closer together, saying things like, oh, of course they would think we're a cult, they could never understand us. Does that make sense? I hope that all made sense. I feel like coming out of my mouth, it made no sense. And to piggyback off of that statement, cults will oftentimes make it sound like they are privy to some kind of secret information that the rest of humanity does not know about. They feel like they have a special insight into the mysteries and workings of the universe that they can then impart upon their followers. Most people who join cults are people who are just like you and me. They are not insane and they're not stupid either. They are generally well-educated individuals who are looking for answers in their lives. Maybe somebody close to them passed away recently and they've been contemplating mortality. Maybe they just lost their job and they're feeling a little lost. Or they could just be fresh into college trying to figure out this new life that they just began. Whatever the reason is, cults will appear to these people as if they have information that nobody else in the world has. They're basically saying that if you join us, you will be among a special group and that only we have the answers you've been looking for. An even more telling red flag for a cult is that a cult will have an excessive amount of devotion for a person, idea, or thing. Most of the widely accepted religions that we know of today do not have a living God. The things that people worship in organized religion are more like concepts and ideas, but a cult will generally stand to benefit only one person, the cult's leader or leaders. A common trait that many cult leaders have had is that they have had near-death experiences in which they believe they have seen visions. Like, you know that whole thing where people have a near-death experience and they see like that tunnel of light or something or other? They say during this time, this is when they have their visions. And usually in these visions, the cult leader will claim that they had some kind of secret knowledge revealed to them, which will be the starting point of them developing their own doctrine. This is not always the case, of course. I've just noticed it to be extremely common for cult leaders. Also, if you've had a near-death experience, that doesn't mean you're a cult leader. Just saying. When the wrong person is in charge of a religious group, a cult can really kind of spring up out of nowhere. For example, a cult could mean a Christian church service in the rural South, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, where the pastor decides suddenly that he is the Messiah, like Christianity but sideways. And this is why a lot of cults will take bits and pieces from the world's major religions to validate their own belief systems. If people are already Christian or Buddhist or Hindu and the cult is slightly Christian, Buddhist, or Hindu, or a combination of all three, people are more likely to join the cult, especially if they feel like this cult is answering questions that their own organized religion might not have been answering. The cult will be just close enough to everything that they already know. And if the cult's leader is a self-appointed messiah or son of God or prophet or whatever, it means their God is no longer conceptual. He has become physical, he's tangible. So in that way, it's kind of validating their sense of spirituality that they had all along. Another major red flag, and this is a big one, is if the cult's leadership answers to no one, not even the law. If the followers are not allowed to ask questions, or if they're not allowed to even criticize their leadership, that's usually a pretty big indicator that something isn't right. It's healthy for individuals to ask questions and be skeptical. It's all a part of critical thinking after all. The only reason cults don't want their followers asking questions questions is because half the time they can't really answer them properly, especially without some of the veneer that they've carefully crafted for themselves falling away. Overall, every tactic used by a cult is to make sure they can keep people under their control so that they can further advance the goals of the cult's leadership. Something else cults will do is that if any of the followers do manage to leave the group, suddenly that person is the devil or they're evil. Some groups have even claimed that if their members leave, they will then die afterwards, which is just not the case. But they will try to demonize dissenters of the cult to try and make them seem evil to the cult's members, to further dissuade them from leaving the group. Another thing that I have personally noticed is a red flag for a cult, and don't quote me on this, it's just something I've kind of noticed out in the world. If there's a free yoga class, like maybe on a flyer or something, do a little bit of research on it before you go. And if you do happen to go to this free yoga class and it sounds like they have maybe like all of the answers you've been looking for, maybe just take a little step back for a minute, because I have noticed a lot of new age religions and cults do recruit through this method. The same thing goes for like a free meditation clinic or a spiritual retreat. Especially the spiritual retreats, please do your research on them before you go. Like, don't get me wrong, love meditation, love self-reflection, but do kind of watch out a little bit. Another one that's probably pretty obvious, but you won't really notice it until you're like in the soup, is illegal activities. Are they committing crimes? Are there crimes going on? Did you perhaps notice them almost immediately? Perhaps leave as soon as you can. And finally, if you do look up a person or a group and there's this paper trail of articles or other writings about how they're con men or charlatans, I would take that into consideration. It may sound like I'm being overly cautious, but with how many cults I've seen pop up even on my TikTok feed, because I am on TikTok frequently. You might have noticed that if you follow me on Instagram. But on my TikTok feed, I see cults all of the time. And it's not just because I talk about cults on my channel. I have received so many TikToks on my For You page that are advertisements essentially for spiritual retreats. Don't even get me started about that one cult that was out in Tennessee or wherever the heck that was. Cults are extremely multifaceted and they have many layers. They say there's a cult out there for everyone. Each cult will operate in different ways and appear to you in different forms. I'm just saying, this stuff is everywhere, and I hope this video gave you a little more insight on what to look for, whether you want to join a cult or not. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel because I am just a small YouTuber and it would really help me out a lot. I'll see you again next time, okay guys? Bye. Oh my god, stop. Don't fall over. Don't do that. I feel like I am so far to the left in this frame right now, but that's okay. That's what editing's for.